So in the next event, which is called Guide Particles to New Shape, I'll just change these to be displayed, let's say, as diamonds. There we go. So if I go back again and press play, you'll see what happens. As I said, they go out as green circles, and then after a random period, they then get passed on to the next event. And I had this really large range in the randomness, because I found that if I had a small range, it became really obvious when the particles were then passed on to the next event, because they pretty much immediately then start to turn around and head back towards the shape. And that became pretty obvious if they all did it at the same time, or even quite close to the same time. So I gave a really large variation in the time within which they could actually be passed on to the next event and then head back inwards to form the new logo. And that really broke it up and gave it a much more sort of organic and natural looking feel. So in the new event, you can see we've got a force, which is wind, so we're still keeping this turbulent effect going on. We've got a find target by time. And you can see the target is the text object that we've got, which is called CG Academy, which is this shape. And we're basically testing on time, which is 120. So on frame 120, we want our particles to come in and actually form this logo. We've got a variation of 30 here. So you can see that basically from frame 110 all the way out to frame 150, the text can actually come in and form this logo. When it tests true for that, then the particles are sent on to the next event. And this is something we covered in the find target test in DVD 4 in this series. So if you want to find out more about that, I'd suggest going back to that DVD and seeing exactly how this test works. So this find target test also guides our particles inwards to a new target. That's the reason for this particular test, and it's very, very good at doing it. So you can see that the particles go outwards, and then as they change over, they then try and head back towards the logo, and you can see they're all swimming around and then heading back inwards to form the text for CG Academy. Now you can see it's pretty difficult to read the word CG Academy in there, and that's one of the issues about this particular effect. You need an awful lot of particles to really make the text legible, and it's also quite difficult to get the particles to explode outwards and then reform into the word CG Academy. One problem I found was that some of the particles would explode outwards to the edge. The find target test is actually based on the closest surface, so it's trying to find the closest point on the CG Academy logo to fly back inwards and dock with. And I found that if I used another system, which was random, that produced a really weird looking effect, because particles from one end of the logo would try and go to the other end of the logo, and that looked really stupid. It became too chaotic, and it didn't really look like a very good effect. So I used closest surface. So there was a lot of tweaking involved at the beginning of the effect to make sure that the particles exploded outward nicely, so that they could then come back in and form the CG Academy text. And the trick was getting them so that they exploded outwards and came back in, and so that they formed the new logo quite evenly. You got an even spread of particles. So that was something to look out for, and it took quite a bit of tweaking to get that right. You can see that as they travel along, they're using a spawn by travel, and I've basically copied this from here. So I'll just turn this on just to get our trails back earlier on in the simulation. This was actually just set up, and I got this working, and I was happy with this. So at this point, I just copied this down here to carry on spawning out trails. And as we're just displaying these as diamonds just to make this a little bit easier. So when we find our target, they then get sent on to the next event, which is called Stop Particles in New Shape. So if I change this to, say, a more sort of pinky color, and let's say we use diamonds. No, let's go for asterisks, and let's make this color a little bit darker, because it's slightly difficult to see here. There we go. So now our text comes in, and we're using a new material called Glow Up. So now we get this sort of flash effect. So as the particles come in and dock, they produce a sort of brighter effect. They glow upwards into white. And you can see they spawn once, and we're spawning one particle again. And then we've got an age test again. So after a certain number of frames, the particles then get sent on to the next event. So basically they're only kept in there for a very short period of time, and you can see they're deleted after 6 frames. So this is just to ensure that our particles aren't left behind. So after an age test of 5 + 1 frames, a little bit random just to break it up a bit, they're then sent on to the next event, which is explode the particles outwards. So you can see here we're using a new material again, which is glowed down, so our particles become darker as they fly outwards. The speed is by icon center out again. You can see we're using quite a high speed, 60 and 30. And the force is wind, so we want this sort of turbulent effect again. And we're spawning particle trails again. You can see it's going off over here into our particle trails. And we're going to delete our particles after 15 frames plus 12. So basically there you can see the particles sit in this event. Let me just press escape here and turn that off. That's just to stop the thing executing. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go up here and append miscellaneous cache. There we go. So now we can actually just cache this effect, and I'll just let it play through so you can actually see it take place. So you can see that it's very stepped, this particular effect. The particles are birthed, then we set them up with an explosion, we explode them outwards. They're allowed to travel out for a random amount of time, and then once we've let them travel back and form the new logo, we keep them there for a very short period, just 5 frames or so, and then our particles explode outwards. So there we are, we can see that as it swirls around, it just comes back in there, stays there for a few frames, and then just explodes outwards. So there we go, that's the reforming text effect. As I said, it's pretty cool looking. It's very useful for you know, certain circumstances, obviously. It's a kind of a magical effect, as I said. You know, this thing where you've got these fire like particles exploding outwards and then coming into reform in a new shape. It doesn't necessarily have to obviously be a fiery effect. It can be watery. It could be even objects, you know, coming into form certain forms. And it shows really how useful the find target test is and what it can be used for. You can get your particles to, you know, form a certain shape, and then you can get them to form a new shape. And, you know, you can get lots of effects using this kind of system. I think there actually was a similar kind of effect to this, which I thought was really cool in Finding Nemo. When the fish form different logos, you know, they form an arrow, then they form another symbol. There's a school of fish, and they go through these different symbols just in a sort of, it was a very cute kind of effect in that film. And I'm not sure if they used particles or if it was based on sort of hand animation and then sort of multiplication. But I thought that was a kind of similar effect to what we're seeing here, maybe. Okay, so let's move on now and have a look at our next chapter, which is the ring wave.